I walked away from home, and it broke us more than I knew. When my daughter-in-law told me to leave that afternoon, I did something I still think about today. I smiled. It was not a strong smile. It was small, thin, the kind of smile people make when they don't want their voice to break. I remember standing in the kitchen, holding a small plate of cut apples I had prepared for my grandson. The sunlight was falling on the floor in soft squares. The house was quiet, except for the low hum of the refrigerator. "I think it's better if you find your own place now," she said. Her voice was not loud, not rude, just firm, final. I felt something inside me go still, like a lamp being quietly turned off. I nodded, even though my chest felt tight. I did not want her to see how her words reached me. I did not want my grandson, who was playing with his toy trucks in the living room, to hear anything tense. So I smiled, and I said, "Of course. I understand." But the truth is, I did not understand. Not then. Not fully. All I knew was that the home I had lived in for the past year, the home where I woke up early to cook breakfast, fold laundry, help with school bags, was no longer my home. I walked to my room slowly, as if my body weighed more than it ever had. I folded my clothes gently. I placed my slippers inside a plastic bag. I looked at the small drawing my grandson made for me, a colorful picture of a house with 3 stick figures. I sat on the edge of the bed and let silence press against my ears. No tears, just silence. When I finally stepped outside with my small suitcase, the wind felt colder than usual. My son was still at work. He didn't even know I was leaving yet. I stood at the gate for a moment, holding the handle of my suitcase. I waited, maybe for someone to call me back. Maybe for a sign that this was a mistake. Maybe just for one more hug from my grandson, but the only sound was the soft click of the door closing behind me. And that is how I walked. Away from the home I loved, without saying a single word that truly showed how much it hurt. I didn't know then that leaving that day would break us even more than staying ever could. I was not supposed to live with my son forever. That was never the plan. But life, as it often does, had its own ideas. Before I moved into his home, I had my own small apartment on the quieter side of town. It was not fancy, but it was mine. I liked waking up to the sounds of birds in the big tree outside my window. I liked cooking my own meals and keeping the place exactly how I wanted it, simple, tidy, peaceful. My husband had passed away years earlier, and after the grief settled, I found a rhythm again. I learned to enjoy my independence, even if some days felt a little too quiet. My son would visit often, especially after he got married. He would bring groceries. He would ask if I needed help with anything. He would sit on my couch, stretched out as if he were still a little boy, and talk to me. About work, about life, about everything and nothing. Those moments were comforting, familiar. I never imagined anything would shift. But then one afternoon, life changed with a single phone call. "Mom, can you stay with us for a little while?" My son asked. His voice sounded tired, stressed. Of course I said yes. I packed a few bags and went with him the next day. His wife had just given birth a few weeks earlier. Their home was overflowing with diapers, baby wipes, bottles, blankets, and the kind of exhaustion that only new parents truly understand. They needed help, and I wanted nothing more than to be there for them. At first, everything felt warm and welcoming. My daughter-in-law smiled when I arrived. She hugged me softly and said, "Thank you for coming, really." I believed her. I spent the first few days helping in small ways, washing bottles, folding tiny clothes, walking around the living room with the baby in my arms while humming old lullabies. I cooked gentle meals and kept the house quiet when they needed rest. My presence felt useful, needed, and I didn't expect anything in return. Just being close to my family was enough. My grandson grew quickly. His small fingers curled around mine. His laughter filled rooms. His sleepy head rested on my shoulder during afternoon naps. I didn't know that these moments, so simple, so ordinary, would later become the memories I held onto the tightest. Weeks passed, then months. The little while I was supposed to stay slowly became longer. No one said anything clearly, but the routine settled in. I slept in the small guest room at the back of the house. I cooked breakfast in the mornings. I took my grandson to the park when his parents needed quiet. I helped with laundry, groceries, cleaning, everything. I didn't mind. I liked feeling useful. I liked being part of their everyday life. But something subtle began to shift over time. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was quiet, like a soft change in temperature that you only notice when it's too late. My daughter-in-law began to seem distant. At first, I blamed it on exhaustion. Anyone caring for a baby would feel tired, stretched, overwhelmed. I understood that. But sometimes, when I walked into a room, she would pause what she was doing as if she didn't want me to see. Other times, she would speak to me with a tone that felt clipped. Short. Careful. After a while, I started to notice the small changes in how she looked at me, as if I was slowly becoming an extra weight on her shoulders. One morning, while I was sweeping the floor, I heard her whispering to my son in the hallway. "She's doing too much," she said. "It's like she's taking over everything. This is our home, not hers." I froze. My hands tightened around the broom handle. I had never wanted to take over. I had only wanted to help. My son responded softly, "She's just trying to make things easier. You know she means well." But his voice lacked strength. It sounded like someone caught between two walls slowly closing in on him. I stepped away quietly so they wouldn't know I heard. And for the rest of the day, my heart felt heavier. Still, I stayed. Still, I helped. Still, I tried to remain invisible in the spaces where I felt unwanted. I told myself it would pass. But the truth is, tiny cracks had already started to spread. I noticed how she stopped letting me decide even the simplest things. Like what vegetables to buy, how to fold towels, how to load the dishwasher. She would redo things right after I finished them, without saying a word. I told myself not to take it personally. But some nights, when the house was quiet, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was slowly overstaying my welcome. My son rarely said anything. He tried to keep peace. He tried to smile through the discomfort. But I could feel the distance forming between them, and between me and both of them. Even then, I stayed hopeful. I stayed patient. I believed things would settle again. I also believed, maybe too strongly, that my presence was helping more than it was hurting. I did not know I was walking on a thin line, one that would soon disappear under my feet. Life inside that house felt calm on the surface, but underneath it, emotions were swirling quietly. Unspoken feelings, unmet expectations, silent misunderstandings. Nobody talked about them. Nobody named them. And perhaps because of that, the day she told me to leave did not come as a sudden storm. It arrived like a long, slow shadow that had been creeping closer without me noticing. But before that day came, there were moments I still hold close, moments that made me believe we were still a family moving together in love. I remember one evening, sitting in the living room with my grandson curled against my arm. I read him a story while the warm yellow lamp lit the pages. My son was sitting nearby, typing on his laptop, but every now and then he looked over and smiled at the two of us. For that moment, it felt like everything was okay. Like the home was peaceful. Like nothing was drifting apart. Looking back now, I realize that sometimes the calmest moments hide the deepest changes. And all it takes is one simple sentence to reveal what has been building for a long, quiet time. The conflict did not arrive like thunder. It did not shout. It did not slam doors or break plates. Instead, it started with small moments. Quiet moments. Moments so gentle and subtle that, at first, I almost convinced myself they meant nothing. But looking back now, those small moments were seeds. And slowly, quietly, they began to grow into something none of us were prepared for: the shifting atmosphere. Every home has a rhythm, an invisible pattern of sounds, routines, moods, and warmth. When I first moved in, the rhythm felt soft, comfortable, a little chaotic because of the new baby, but still held together by love. Then, over time, the rhythm changed, not instantly. Not dramatically, just little by little. Some days, my daughter-in-law would walk past me without saying good morning. She didn't look angry, just distant, as if her mind were somewhere far away. Other days, when I asked simple questions, "Do you want me to cook dinner tonight?" or "Should I take the baby for a walk?" she would respond with short answers that felt colder than the room itself. "No, it's okay. I already did that. You don't have to." Her words were plain, but her tone carried a quiet heaviness. My son noticed it too, though he pretended he didn't. One afternoon he came home from work and placed his bag on the table with a tired sigh. I was peeling potatoes in the kitchen. Long day? I asked gently. He nodded and forced a smile. Yeah, things are complicated right now. I waited for him to explain, but he didn't. Instead, he rubbed his temples, walked into the living room, and sat down on the couch, staring ahead at nothing. It was the kind of silence that carries weight, like someone holding a pain they don't know how to name. I wanted to ask more. I wanted to help, but I didn't. I didn't want to be another problem on his list. The small misunderstandings. The tension grew slowly, almost invisibly. And the worst part was that most of it came from misunderstandings, little things that I never imagined could become big. Like the time I washed a new set of baby clothes without checking the instructions. They shrank slightly, but still looked fine to me. My daughter-in-law held up a tiny shirt and sighed sharply. Mom, you have to read the tags. These were expensive. Her voice was controlled, but the disappointment in her eyes felt like a heavy stone placed on my chest. I'm sorry, I said softly. I didn't mean. I know, she said quickly. But still. Or the day I rearranged the kitchen shelves so everything was easier for me to reach. It made sense to me. I spent most of my time cooking for the family. But when she opened the cabinet and realized things had been moved, she froze. Her jaw tightened. Why did you touch this? I just wanted to organize it so. No, she interrupted. This is my kitchen. Please leave it the way I set it up. I apologized again. I always apologized. She didn't shout. She didn't even raise her voice. But the space between us widened with every small misunderstanding, like a slow, quiet river forming its own path. My son tried to stay neutral. Too neutral. One evening he said, Mom, just try to give her some space. She's stressed. She's adjusting. I nodded, even though the words stung more than he realized. Give her space. In her home, where I was a guest who had slowly started to feel like a shadow. Feeling unwanted. The hardest part of that time was the way I began to feel in my own skin. I felt like I needed permission for everything, to open a cabinet, to fold a shirt, to sit in a certain chair, to speak at certain times. I felt like I was tiptoeing around my own family. Some days, when I walked into the living room, the conversation would suddenly shift. Not because of secrets or gossip, but because my presence changed the air. It felt like being a visitor who stayed too long. Someone tolerated, not welcomed. But even then, I tried to convince myself that I was imagining it. That I was being too sensitive. That I was reading too much into small moments. I told myself, she will come around. She's just adjusting. This is temporary. And maybe she was adjusting. Maybe she was overwhelmed. Maybe she felt her home was no longer her own. I cannot blame her for that. But at the time, it felt like I was shrinking, little by little. The dinner table moment. One evening, the three of us sat at the dinner table. I had cooked a simple meal, chicken soup, vegetable stir-fry, and rice. It smelled warm and familiar, like the dinners I used to make when my son was little. We sat down. My grandson babbled happily in his high chair. But my daughter-in-law said nothing. She ate quietly, staring down at her plate. My son tried to make light conversation. How was your day, Mom? It was good, I said softly. I took the baby for a walk. We saw some ducks at the park. He smiled warmly. That sounds nice. But his wife didn't respond. She didn't even look up. At one point, when I reached for a bowl near her, my hand brushed hers by accident. She pulled her hand back quickly. Too quickly, as if my touch burned her. I froze. She kept eating. My son looked down, pretending he didn't notice. I swallowed hard and finished dinner silently. That night, in the guest room, I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time. My hands rested on my lap. My heart felt heavy, like a stone too dense to carry. I wondered, am I helping, or hurting? Am I needed, or in the way? The questions didn't come with answers. Only quiet tears, trying to step back. After that night, I tried to step back more. I stopped rearranging anything. I stopped offering advice unless asked. I stopped doing certain chores for fear of doing them wrong. I tried to blend into the background. But the more I stepped back, the more it felt like my daughter-in-law stepped farther away emotionally. My grandson was the only one who brought me comfort. He would run to me with his little arms open. He would tug at my dress and say, Nana, play. He would fall asleep on my lap while I hummed old lullabies. Those moments felt like sunlight. They reminded me I still belonged somewhere. But even they began to feel fragile. One morning, as I was playing, I cannot blame her for that. But at the time, it felt like I was shrinking, little by little. The dinner table moment. One evening, the three of us sat at the dinner table. I had cooked a simple meal, chicken soup, vegetable stir-fry, and rice. It smelled warm and familiar, like the dinners I used to make when my son was little. We sat down. My grandson babbled happily in his high chair. But my daughter-in-law said nothing. She ate quietly, staring down at her plate. My son tried to make light conversation. "How was your day, Mom?" "It was good," I said softly. "I took the baby for a walk. We saw some ducks at the park." He smiled warmly. "That sounds nice." But his wife didn't respond. She didn't even look up. At one point, when I reached for a bowl near her, my hand brushed hers by accident. She pulled her hand back quickly. Too quickly, as if my touch burned her. I froze. She kept eating. My son looked down, pretending he didn't notice. I swallowed hard and finished dinner silently. That night, in the guest room, I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time. My hands rested on my lap. My heart felt heavy, like a stone too dense to carry. I wondered, am I helping, or hurting? Am I needed, or in the way? The questions didn't come with answers. Only quiet tears, trying to step back. After that night, I tried to step back more. I stopped rearranging anything. I stopped offering advice unless asked. I stopped doing certain chores for fear of doing them wrong. I tried to blend into the background. But the more I stepped back, the more it felt like my daughter-in-law stepped farther away emotionally. My grandson was the only one who brought me comfort. He would run to me with his little arms open. He would tug at my dress and say, "Nana, play." He would fall asleep on my lap while I hummed old lullabies. Those moments felt like sunlight. They reminded me I still belonged somewhere. But even they began to feel fragile. One morning, as I was playing with him on the living room floor, she walked in and said, "I'll take him now. He needs to be with me more." Her voice was not cruel, just firm. I handed him to her, even though he reached back for me with tiny hands. I smiled, but my heart cracked a little. A quiet argument in the hallway. One of the clearest memories from that period happened late one night. The baby was asleep. The house was dark, except for the soft hallway light. I walked out of my room to get a glass of water. I did not know they were standing in the hallway, whispering. I stopped when I heard my name. "I feel like she's always watching me," my daughter-in-law said quietly. "I can't relax in my own home." My son tried to speak calmly. "She's not trying to control anything. She's just helping. I know she means well," she said. "But I feel like I can't breathe sometimes. Like she's judging everything I do." "She isn't," he insisted. "But I understand you're tired." "I'm not just tired," she whispered. "I want our home to be ours, not a place where I have to adjust constantly." There was a long pause. Then she said something softer, but sharper. "I think it's time for her to have her own space again." My heart dropped. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, like a leaf falling from a tree. I turned around and walked back to my room without getting the water. I closed the door softly. I sat on the bed. My hands trembled slightly. I knew then that my days in that house were numbered. The day everything cracked. The real breaking point was not loud. It did not involve shouting. No one threw hurtful words. It was just a moment. A simple moment. I was in the kitchen preparing a small plate of sliced apples for my grandson. The morning light was gentle. The house smelled of soap and fresh air. My daughter-in-law walked in. She looked calm, but there was firmness behind her eyes. "Can we talk for a moment?" she asked. I wiped my hands on a towel. I nodded. She sat down at the table, and I stood near the counter, unsure of where to place myself. She took a breath. Her voice was soft but steady. "I think it's time for you to find your own place again." My heart tightened, but I kept my face still. She continued, "We need space. Just us. Our own routine. Our own way of doing things." I nodded slowly. I did not trust my voice yet. "I hope you understand," she said. I wanted to tell her that I did. I wanted to tell her I accepted it. I wanted to tell her I had seen this coming. But the only thing I managed was a small smile. A smile that hid more than it revealed. A smile that said, "I'll be okay," even though I wasn't. She exhaled with relief, as if a weight had lifted from her. She didn't see the new one that had just fallen onto me. And that is where the rising conflict ended. Not with a storm, but with a quiet, gentle fracture that echoed through the walls of the home I once felt part of. The days after that conversation passed quietly, almost too quietly. I moved through the house like a guest who didn't want to take up space. I spoke softly. I walked slowly. I touched nothing unless necessary. My daughter-in-law seemed lighter. Not happier, exactly, but relieved. As if she had taken back something she felt was slipping from her hands. My son, he looked caught between two worlds. He avoided long conversations with me, perhaps because he didn't know what to say, or because he was afraid to show how he really felt. And I felt the air around me thinning, like there was less and less room for me to exist inside that house. I kept telling myself I would leave gracefully, quietly, without causing pain, but inside, I felt something breaking. Not loudly, not suddenly, just slowly. Like a thin piece of glass developing cracks that spread with every breath. The decision to leave. 2 nights after the kitchen conversation, I stood in the guest room with the lights turned off. The moonlight came through the window, soft and pale. Touching the edge of my suitcase. I had not packed yet. I didn't know where I would go. My old apartment had been rented out after I moved in with them. Finding a new place felt overwhelming, but I didn't want to burden anyone with that detail. I pressed my hand against the window and whispered to myself, "You can do this. You've lived alone before. You'll manage again." But the truth was, I had grown used to the sound of my grandson's footsteps. I had grown used to being needed. I had grown used to feeling like part of a family again. Leaving meant losing that. I didn't sleep much that night. Or the night after. And then came the turning point, the moment everything broke open, the morning it happened. It happened on a calm morning, the kind where the sunlight filled the house with a gentle warmth. The baby had woken early, so I carried him to the living room while his parents slept a little longer. I sat in the rocking chair with him, humming the lullaby my mother once sang to me. He rested his small head against my shoulder, one hand clutching the fabric of my shirt. In that moment, everything felt peaceful, pure, perfect. But when my daughter-in-law walked into the room, the peace cracked like thin ice under too much weight. She stood still for a moment, watching us. Then she said in a quiet voice, "I think you're holding him too much." I looked up, confused. He was crying. I just wanted to comfort him. "I know," she said, taking a breath. "But you're making him too attached. He needs to rely on me more." Her words were soft, but they hit me harder than she realized. I handed the baby to her gently. He whimpered, reaching his tiny arms back toward me. She pulled him close, turning slightly so he couldn't see me anymore. I stepped away. I folded my hands together. I said nothing. She walked away slowly, humming the same lullaby I had been singing, and for the first time, I felt like my love for my grandson was becoming a problem, the breaking conversation. Later that afternoon, she approached me again. Her expression was calm, but her eyes told a different story, one of exhaustion, confusion, and perhaps a touch of resentment. She sat down at the edge of the couch. I remained standing near the doorway, unsure whether I should sit or leave. "Can we talk?" she asked quietly. I nodded. She folded her hands in her lap and looked down for a moment before speaking. "I want to be honest with you," she said. "I feel overwhelmed. I feel like I'm losing control of my own home. My own child." I stayed silent, letting her speak. "You're so helpful," she continued. "And I appreciate everything you do. I really do. But sometimes it feels like you're taking my place." Her voice trembled slightly. "I feel like the baby loves you more. I feel like my husband listens to you more. I feel like I'm not enough, and I don't know how to handle that." Her confession softened something inside me. For the first time, I saw her not as someone pushing me away, but as someone scared. Someone struggling. I sat down slowly. "I never wanted to make you feel that way," I said gently. "I only wanted to help. I never wanted to replace you." She nodded, tears gathering in her eyes. "I know," she whispered. "But every day feels harder. I need space. We need space. I need to feel like a mother, not like someone being watched, corrected, or overshadowed." The words overshadowed and watched cut deep because I had never meant to do any of those things. But intentions don't always erase impact. There was a long pause before she said the sentence that sealed everything. I think it's best if you move out soon. Maybe this weekend, not next month, not 2 weeks from now, not when I had time to prepare. This weekend. I felt my heart drop to the floor. Not because she was cruel. Not because she hated me, but because she didn't realize how hard it was for someone like me, someone older, someone once independent, someone now vulnerable, to suddenly find a new home in just a few days. I nodded slowly. I understand, I whispered. My voice barely held together. She exhaled with relief, the kind you release when a hard truth is finally spoken out loud. And that was the moment the turning point arrived. Quietly, softly, but completely. My son's reaction. Later that evening, when my son returned home, she pulled him aside to tell him what we had discussed. I stayed in the kitchen, washing dishes, pretending I wasn't listening. Their voices were low, but the house was small. Are you sure this is the right thing? He asked her. Yes, she whispered. I need this. We need this. I can't breathe like this anymore. He sighed deeply. I don't want to hurt her. I don't either, she said. But she'll be okay. She's strong. And she needs her own life too. I felt those words land inside me, heavy and sharp. She'll be okay. No one asked whether I really would be. No one asked if I had a place ready. No one asked how sudden this felt. I didn't hold it against them. Young people can be blind to the struggles of someone older. Not out of cruelty, but out of inexperience. Still, the pain was real. Later, after he finished the conversation, my son came into the kitchen. He looked at me with eyes full of guilt. Mom, he said quietly, we really need some space. Just for a while. I turned off the faucet. I dried my hands slowly. I know, I replied softly. It's okay. He reached out as if to hug me, but stopped halfway, unsure. I stepped forward and hugged him gently. I don't want you to feel pushed out. He murmured. I know, I whispered. But maybe this is what's best. For everyone. He nodded against my shoulder. But when he let go, his eyes looked glossy, as if he had swallowed sadness whole. Packing the unpacked life. The next morning, I began packing. The suitcase that sat empty for days was now being filled with the life I had lived inside their home. A few dresses, my robe, my slippers, 3 small framed photos, some knitting I never finished. A jewelry box with quiet memories resting inside. It felt like gathering pieces of myself that I had slowly spread throughout the house. As I folded everything neatly, I found a small sock in the drawer, my grandson's. Tiny, soft, blue with a small embroidered cloud. I held it against my heart and closed my eyes. I whispered, I'm still your Nana. No matter where I go. A small tear slipped onto the fabric. I placed the sock gently back in the drawer. I didn't want to take anything that belonged to him. When I zipped the suitcase, the sound felt final. Too final. Like closing a book I wasn't ready to finish. The scene in the kitchen. On my last evening there, something happened that became the true emotional breaking point, not because it was cruel, but because it revealed how deeply everyone was hurting. I was standing in the kitchen making tea. My hands were steady, but inside I felt fragile. My daughter-in-law walked in. We stood near each other quietly. Then she said softly, I hope you don't think I hate you. I looked at her and shook my head. No, I said gently. I don't think that. She swallowed hard. I'm just trying to be a good mother. And sometimes I feel like I'm failing. I reached out and placed my hand lightly on her arm. You're not failing, I said. You're learning, just like I once learned. She looked down, her eyes filling with tears. I'm sorry if I hurt you, she whispered. I smiled softly. You didn't hurt me, I lied, because sometimes love means hiding the wounds so the other person doesn't walk away feeling guilty. She nodded, even though she didn't fully believe my words. And in that quiet kitchen, with the soft hum of the refrigerator and the dim glow of the overhead light, the truth settled between us. This wasn't about anger. This wasn't about blame. This wasn't about right or wrong. This was about fear. Hers, mine, even my son's. Fear of losing space. Fear of losing control. Fear of losing connection. Fear of not being enough. And sometimes fear pushes people apart even when they don't want to be apart. The morning I left, The morning of my departure came slowly. I woke before everyone else. I dressed quietly. I made my bed neatly, smoothing the blanket with careful hands. I carried my suitcase to the living room. The wheels made a soft brushing sound across the floor, a sound I still remember. I sat down on the edge of the couch and waited. One by one, they woke. My son came out first. His hair was messy, his eyes tired. He sat beside me silently. "Mom," he said quietly. I squeezed his hand. "It's okay," I told him. But his lips trembled, and that hurt more than anything else. My daughter-in-law came out next, holding their baby. She looked hesitant, nervous. She whispered, "Good morning," and I smiled back. Then I looked into my grandson's little face. His eyes were bright, still full of innocence. He reached toward me, arms wide. My daughter-in-law hesitated for half a second, then handed him to me. I held him close. His tiny hands touched my cheeks. He giggled softly, unaware of the heaviness in the room. I whispered in his ear, "Nana loves you. Always." Then I kissed his forehead gently. My son carried my suitcase to the front door. The house felt quiet, too quiet. When he opened the door, the cool air of the outside world rushed in. I stepped out slowly. My heart ached in a way I hadn't felt in years. My son hugged me tightly. His voice cracked when he whispered, "Come back anytime, Mom." I nodded, but inside I knew things would never be the same again. My daughter-in-law stood behind him, holding the baby. She gave me a small, hopeful smile. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. I walked down the steps with slow, steady breaths. And as the door closed behind me, I felt something inside me break, quietly and completely. The rain had stopped by the next morning, but the quiet inside the community home stayed heavy. When I woke up, the first thing I felt was the weight in my chest. Not sharp, just heavy, like a stone that had settled in overnight and decided to stay. I sat at the edge of the small bed, the blanket gathered in my hands, and tried to breathe through the stillness. For the first time in many years, I had no morning chores. No lunchbox to prepare, no laundry to fold, no little footsteps running down a hallway calling for me. It was a strange kind of silence. A clean one, but a lonely one too. I ran my fingers through my hair and whispered to myself, "You have to keep moving." Because deep down, I knew if I didn't keep moving, the sadness would swallow me whole. I walked to the small cafeteria inside the community center. The smell of warm oatmeal and coffee filled the air. A few residents greeted me with kind nods. They didn't know my story, but older people carry a way of recognizing pain even when it's quiet. I sat by the window with a cup of tea. Outside, the sky was turning from gray to a soft pale blue. As I held the warm cup between my hands, I let myself accept a thought I had been pushing away. Maybe I didn't just leave the house that day. Maybe I left a part of my old life too. Not because I wanted to. Not because I deserved to. But because life sometimes moves people apart even when the love is still there. Still, it hurt, and hurting is something you can't rush through. I stayed at the community home for weeks. I helped in the kitchen sometimes. I joined the quiet book evenings. I shared small conversations with people who were also trying to rebuild something inside themselves. But every night, before I slept, I looked at the drawing my grandson made, the one with 3 colorful stick figures standing under a bright sun. And I whispered, "I miss you." I knew I couldn't go back right away. Not until I felt steadier. Not until I could stand in that house again without breaking. But I also knew something else. I didn't want to lose my family forever. One morning, maybe 2 months later, I gathered enough courage to call my son. My hands trembled a little as I held the phone. When he picked up, his voice sounded surprised. "Mom? Is that you?" "Yes," I whispered. "It's me." There was a long pause, long enough for my eyes to close. "I'm sorry," he finally said, his voice thick. "I'm so sorry for everything." I took a deep breath. "You don't have to apologize for everything, just talk to me." So he did. For nearly an hour, we talked. He told me how the house felt different since I left. How my grandson kept asking, "Where is Grandma?" How he found my slippers still tucked near the door and couldn't bring himself to move them. He told me he was angry at himself, at the situation, even at the pressure he and his wife were under. But mostly, he was sad. It wasn't supposed to happen that way, he said in a quiet voice. I felt tears rising, but I held them back. I know, I told him. Life gets messy. People get tired. And sometimes we say things we don't truly mean. We talked about what happened that day. Not with blame, not with bitterness, but like two people trying to understand the scar they now shared. When the call ended, he said, "Mom, when you're ready, can we see you?" That question stayed with me long after I placed the phone down. When you're ready. Not when they were ready. Not when she was ready. But when I was ready. It felt like the first open door since the day I walked away. A week later, I decided to visit a small park near their home. I didn't go to their house yet, that felt too big, too emotional, too soon. But I wanted to be close. Just close enough to breathe the same air. I sat on a wooden bench under a large tree. The branches were moving slowly in the wind, and the sound of children playing reached me from the playground nearby. It took only a few minutes before I saw them. My son was holding my grandson's hand as they walked along the path. My grandson spotted me first. I don't know how, but children have a way of recognizing love even from far away. He stopped walking. Then he pulled his hand from his father's and ran toward me with small, determined steps. "Grandma," he shouted, his arms wide. The sound of that one word, "Grandma," broke something inside me and healed something at the same time. I opened my arms, and he ran straight into them. I held him tight, my cheek against his hair, breathing in the soft, familiar scent of warm sunshine and innocence. "I missed you," he whispered. "I missed you too," I said, my voice shaking just a little. My son reached us moments later. He was breathing deeply, almost nervously, as if he wasn't sure what I would say. But when he stood in front of me, I saw a boy again, not the man with responsibilities, bills, pressures, and a tired marriage, but the boy I once walked to school, holding his small hand. We didn't say much. We didn't have to. He sat beside me on the bench. My grandson stayed in my lap, drawing little circles on my palm with his tiny finger. After a few minutes, my son said softly, "She wants to say sorry too, but she's embarrassed." I looked at him. "It's okay," I whispered. "I'm not ready to talk yet, but one day, maybe soon. I don't want anger between us." He nodded, relief washing over his face. We spent the rest of the afternoon talking quietly. Not about the argument, not about the pain, just normal things: school, work, groceries, a neighbor's barking dog, little pieces of life that slowly stitched us back together. And for a moment, I felt the warmth of belonging again. Over the next few weeks, we met in the park several times. It was easier than stepping back into the house right away. The open space made it easier to breathe, easier to forgive, easier to let the past settle without forcing anything too fast. My grandson always ran to me first. My son always walked slower behind him. And I always waited on the same bench under the same tree. But even as those days softened the hurt inside me, I knew eventually I had to face the one person whose words had pushed everything apart. My daughter-in-law. One morning, my son called me again. This time, his voice was steadier. "Mom, she would like to meet you. Just talk. She understands if you say no." I closed my eyes for a moment. Forgiveness is not a switch you turn on. It is a slow unfolding, like a flower opening after winter. "I'll meet her," I said quietly. "Tell her to come to the park." When I arrived, I sat on the bench with my hands folded. The wind felt cool, brushing gently against my face. I could feel my heart beating faster than usual. She walked toward me alone. No son, no grandson, just her. She looked nervous, holding her arms close to her chest, her steps small and careful, as if she wasn't sure I would even look at her. When she reached me, she stopped a few feet away. I'm sorry," she said softly. Not dramatic, not rushed, just honest. "I was tired. I was stressed. I said something I should not have said. And I hurt you. I know I did. I've been thinking about it every day." Her voice cracked just a little. I looked at her, really looked at her, and I saw a young woman juggling work, a child, responsibilities, her own feelings, her own fears. And I realized something important. She hadn't pushed me out because she hated me. She had pushed me out because she felt overwhelmed. And sometimes overwhelmed people break in ways they regret. I nodded slowly. "Your words hurt, but I don't want us to stay stuck in that moment anymore." She took a shaky breath. "I don't want that either." We talked for a long time. Not perfectly, not easily, but honestly. She told me she loved how I cared for my grandson but felt insecure about not being enough as a mother. She told me she felt guilty relying on me. She told me she feared I saw her mistakes more than her effort. And I realized she wasn't pushing me away. She was pushing away her own feelings of not being good enough. When she finished speaking, her eyes were wet. "I never wanted you to feel unwanted," she whispered. "I know," I said. "We're all human. We all say things when we feel tired or scared." For the first time in months, we smiled at each other. Not with perfection, but with forgiveness. A few weeks later, I visited the house again. Not to move in, not to replace anything, just to share breakfast, the way we used to, before everything went wrong. The moment I stepped inside, the familiar smell of coffee and warm toast wrapped around me. My slippers were still near the door, untouched. My grandson ran to me like he always did, arms wide, joy shining in his small face. My son hugged me gently. My daughter-in-law offered me a warm smile and a quiet welcome. We sat at the table together. The four of us. The same table where small misunderstandings once grew into silence, now held softer voices, kinder words, gentler hearts. And for the first time since the day I left, I felt something shift. Not backward, not back to how things were, but forward, toward a new understanding, a new balance, a new way of being a family. A way where I was not a burden. A way where I was not invisible. A way where love had space again. Healing did not happen all at once. It never does. But day by day, we rebuilt what had cracked between us. My daughter-in-law and I learned to speak more openly. My son learned to stand in the middle without breaking. And my grandson learned that families can struggle, but still choose each other in the end. I no longer lived with them. And strangely, that became okay. Because sometimes distance is not a punishment, it's protection. It gives people space to grow, to breathe, to see each other with softer eyes. But I visited often. I helped sometimes, not always. I listened more. I understood more. And they did too. Little by little, meal by meal, conversation by conversation, we found our way back to one another. Not perfectly, but honestly, and gently. And that was enough. Sometimes, when I sit by my window in the early morning, watching the sun rise over the quiet street, I think about that day, the day I walked away from home. For a long time, I believed that moment was the end of something. The end of my place in the family. The end of my role as a mother. The end of my daily purpose. But now, as I look back with a calmer heart, I understand something different. It wasn't an ending. It was a beginning I didn't know I needed. A beginning born from pain, but still a beginning. Walking away hurt. It broke me open in ways I wasn't ready for. It left me feeling small, lost, and unwanted. But it also gave space for honesty, space for growth, space for everyone in the house to breathe and see each other with new eyes. Sometimes families grow too close in the wrong places and too distant in the right ones. Sometimes love gets buried under stress, routines, and unspoken fears. And sometimes, stepping back is the only way we realize how much we truly matter to one another. I didn't know that then. I only know it now. When I think about my grandson's small arms around my neck the day we met again in the park, when I remember the look in my son's eyes as he apologized, when I hear the soft tremble in my daughter-in-law's voice when she said, "I'm sorry," I realize that leaving didn't break us forever. It broke us open. And from that opening, something gentler began. Not perfect, not flawless, but real. We still have our differences. We still get tired. We still make mistakes. But now we talk. Now we pause. Now we try. That alone is a small miracle. I visit my son's home often now. We eat together. We laugh. Sometimes we sit quietly, just enjoying the space between us that no longer feels heavy. My daughter-in-law makes tea for me, and I help her slice fruit for my grandson. My grandson climbs into my lap with his drawings, telling me stories only a child could imagine. And every time I leave their house in the evening, I feel something warm settle inside my chest. Belonging, not forced, not demanded, simply offered. Maybe that is what family truly is, a place where love is not always perfect, but always possible. Before all this, I believed that being strong meant staying silent. Not complaining, not showing hurt, not admitting when something felt wrong. But the truth is, strength looks different now. Strength is slow. Strength is gentle. Strength is choosing to forgive, even when the pain still whispers. Strength is talking instead of hiding. Strength is walking away when you must, and walking back when your heart is ready. And strength is understanding that sometimes people speak from their wounds, not their hearts.